Hello again. This is part 5 of a mini-series on Jewish monotheism and Christian Trinitarian doctrine by Pinchas Lapide. In the last segment, we looked at his struggle with the Trinity. He admits that there are parallels to the Trinitarian's dogma in rabbinic speculation and the speculation of Jewish mystics through the ages, even before Christ, even before Trinitarian doctrine became official in the church. But he's still struggling with it. And yet, and there's the amazing thing, Pinchas Lapide believed in the literal resurrection of Jesus. But Paul says in Romans 1:4 that he was declared to be, that is, Jesus was declared to be the Son of God by the resurrection from the dead. What does Pinchas Lapide do with the resurrection? Here's how he reasons on it. I see it plainly and simply as a historical event, as a tangible reality, as an indication for the primitive community that this Jesus was not abandoned by God, as a kind of response to the words, troubled unto death, which were spoken on the cross. My God, why have you forsaken me? I accept the resurrection in the sense that I believe the primitive community understood it. However, I cannot accept it as an eschatological beginning, as an inbreaking of the reign of heaven, that is the kingdom of God, because unfortunately I am unable to discover a single trace of this reign of heaven. Now this is a very typical rabbinic response to the claims of Jesus to be the Messiah, that if he were the Messiah, the kingdom of God would have begun for the Jews on earth. So he faces this objection. But if the resurrection was a historical event, why then did the Jews not react to it? For the resurrection could certainly be accepted by believing persons. And Lapide says to that objection, if the resurrection of Jesus from the dead on that Easter Sunday were a public event which had been made known to, according to my counting, not only 530 Jewish men and women, but could have been experienced by 530,000 Jews approximately, the then current population of Jerusalem, which would have been swollen by the stream of Passover pilgrims. A crossroads in salvation history would have been arrived at. So in other words, if there had been more witnesses, more than 500 that are recorded by Paul in Corinthians, if Christ had revealed himself to the entire population of Jerusalem, things might have been different. So Lapide goes on, do you know what would have happened then? I can imagine only the following happening. All Jerusalem would have become believers in Jesus. For do not forget that Messiah is a Hebraic concept, that Messianitis was and is a Jewish illness, namely the almost feverish expectation of the Redeemer, and that no land in the world and no city under the sun awaited the Redeemer in such yearning fashion as did Jerusalem during the lifetime of Jesus. If he had shown himself as the resurrected one, not only to the 530 Jewish witnesses, but to the entire population, all Jews would have become followers of Jesus. To me, this would have had only one imaginable consequence. The church, baptism, the forgiveness of sins, the cross, everything which today is Christian, would have remained an inner Jewish institution. And you, my dear friend, that is Jurgen Moltmann, would today still be offering horse meat to Wotan on the Godesberg. In other words, you'd still be a pagan. That's what Germans were doing in 33 AD. But in other words, or put in other words, I see in the fact that the Easter experience was imparted to only some Jews the finger of God, indicating that, as it says in the New Testament, the time was fulfilled. For me, that means that the time was ripe, that the faith in one God should be carried into the world of the Gentiles. The Jews were already believers. They were already on the way to God. Or as Rosenzweig so beautifully put it when he accepted the sentence of John, no one comes to the Father except through me. John 14:6, of course. No one except those who are already with the Father, and those are the Jews. This is called Jewish exceptionalism. And Lapide goes on, if you Christians for 1500 years were wont to explain the parable of the two sons, such that the son who remained home is the Jew, while the lost son who wandered off to the Gentiles is the church, who then penitently comes back home, where the Father embraces him full of love, despite all his sins and all his previous godlessness, and commands that the fatted calf be slaughtered for him, then please also be so logical as to read the next sentence out of the mouth of the Father, who can be no one other than God the Father. My child, says the Father to the Son, who remain home, that is us Jews, you are always with me, and everything which is mine also belongs to you. That's Luke 15, verse 31. Hence I do not need the Christ in order to come to the Father. In other words, I believe that the Christ event leads to a way of salvation which God has opened up in order to bring the Gentile world into the community of God's Israel. Above all, three things were necessary for the founding of the Gentile church to which you, that is Jurgen Moltmann, belong. As a Jew, I am thinking now in the historic, pragmatic, three-dimensional fashion. First, a Jewish people in its biblical homeland in order to bring Jesus and the apostles into the world. Secondly, there was needed a small Jewish yes to Jesus, that is the primitive community, together with Paul and his helpers. Finally, however, there was also needed a large Jewish no. For if there had been no large Jewish no, which you can read about in Romans 11 and Acts 13, the entire church would have remained intra-Jewish, that is a Jewish phenomenon. And to be honest, we did not need it. Since Sinai, we have known the way to the Father. You, on the other hand, were very much in need of it. Therefore, your becoming Christian is for me a portion of God's plan of salvation. And I do not find it difficult to accept the church as an institution of salvation. But please, you do not need to sprinkle sugar on top of honey, as you do when you wish to baptize us. The sugar on top of the honey is simply superfluous. We are already with the Father, and we know the way, despite all the sins, stiff-neckedness, and transgressions of which we are guilty, and which we penitently confess. We are certainly no saints. We are not even just, but we are Jews who know the way to the one Father. It is similar to, if not identical with, the way which Jesus of Nazareth and after him, Paul of Tarsus, opened up and showed you. Now, of course, the evangelical world, well, most of the church for 2,000 years rejects this view of salvation, that the Jews are already saved. It's the Gentiles who needed Messiah. Messiah was sent to the Jews, so for the words King of the Jews to be ironically nailed to the cross above Jesus is an eternal sentence upon efforts to be saved by means of the law, according to Paul anyway. So we're putting as a link on the screen why Jesus, the exclusive claims of Christianity. And I don't think the church can afford to back down from these exclusive claims of Jesus Christ.